Good morning, everyone. We will begin our committee hearing, Committee of Housing and Community Development. I would like to make an announcement before we begin that item number 2, AB 1198, Assemblymember Norby has pulled that bill, so we will not be hearing that today. We don't have quorum yet, so we'll begin as a subcommittee. Senator Corbett, item number 3, Senate Bill 880. Happy New Year and welcome to our
Happy New
committee.
Year. Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members. Thank you for being here to hear Senate Bill 880. And let me just begin by saying I'm happy to accept the committee's amendments as author's amendments. This bill is actually a clarification of a bill that was done last year. Senate Bill 880 will clarify existing law, which was established by Senate Bill 209 last year, this bill will address the governor's signing message in that bill. We have been working with the governor's office and the stakeholders to address the governor's signing message and also improve upon last year's bill. The bill deals with the ability of charging stations to be placed in common interest development residences. The governor was supportive of SB 209, but he was concerned about language that would permit individual homeowners to unreasonably use or occupy common areas, and this bill takes care of that concern. The governor also added that the right of the common interest development to establish reasonable rules for the use of common areas for charging stations should be part of the new law as well. So Senate Bill 880 addresses the governor's signing message by restricting owners' ability to install charging stations in a common area unless there's an agreement with the association. Owners will still be protected if they're installing the charging station in their own designated parking space. SB 880 sets up a process which is fair for installing charging stations in common areas and will allow owners to work with associations to accommodate their needs. Now, I'm not sure if they're here, but Kathy Lynch from Plug in America and Carrie Mazzoni from the Executive Council of Homeowners are in support of this measure, and we're to be here today. There they are, to testify in support. And there is no opposition to this measure.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Carrie Mazzoni for the Executive Council of Homeowners. Throughout the process last year, we were very concerned about encroachment in common area. We've worked very hard with the author on the amendments that are being presented to you today, and we are in support of those amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness.
Sylvia Solis-Shaw on behalf of the California Electric Transportation Coalition. We're also in strong support of the measure. We do look forward to clarifying a couple of remaining issues that some of the other stakeholders and ourselves have regarding the insurance requirements that will be placed on the EV owners, but we are definitely in strong support of the intent of where this bill is. Thank you.
Anyone else in support? Opposition? I see none. We will wait until we get quorum to call your bill to the vote.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members.
For your presentation. Assemblymember Calderon, I would like to wait a couple of minutes until we get more members here for your presentation, maybe, because we have received quite a bit of phone calls. We've called. I understand.
Just now. She's sitting here. I know. I've been telling her about
Okay, we will continue by beginning to establish a quorum, and then we'll ask for your presentation, Mr. Calderon.
Torres,
Here.
Atkins, Bradford, Cedillo, Hueso, Jeffries, Miller. We have a quorum.
Okay, we will have a quorum. We'll begin with item number 1, AB 317.
Yes, Madam Chair, first I want to thank you, and I want to thank your staff for working really hard with my staff to try and find some good policy and make good policy that balances the equities and attempts to deal with the main issue that gives rise to this issue generally. And so I want to thank you for your help in that regard. This is a bill dealing with rent control in mobile home park districts. As this committee is well aware, and as you are aware, Madam Chair, I've had a bill ongoing that would exempt, would impose vacancy decontrol. That means that no one would be affected when the bill passed, but if anybody moved out of their mobile home, then rents could be brought up to market values. The main issue there was that these are the homes. These mobile homes are homes of the people that own them, and they build equity, and if they can't build, and they should be able to build the equity in their home because it's their home. The other side of the issue was that, well, they build equity because the rents are artificially low. Well, it was never my intention to disrupt anybody's current way of life. It was never my intention to limit the supply of affordable housing. What I was most concerned with are the second homes and the third homes, the vacation homes, that are in Malibu and Oceanside and Escondido and all along the coast, where mobile home park owners actually pay, less than what it probably would cost someone to commute and pay for parking for that day. And so hopefully that this bill now, as amended, will provide some kind of fair and balanced approach to the issue. And what the bill says is that if you're in a mobile home and that's your sole residence, then this bill doesn't affect you. But if you have a second home or a third home, and your mobile home is a vacation home, well, that's not the purpose of mobile home or rent control for mobile homes. The purpose is to protect the supply of affordable housing. It isn't to, give an advantage to wealthy people. So if you own more than one home, and that mobile home is not your sole residence, if you do own more than one home, but that is your sole residence, and will be sort of arbitrated, or maybe even the courts, or some members thought maybe we should open up to the courts as well. I don't know, but right now, as the bill written, it's an arbitration. If based on factors, the arbiter finds out or determines that no, that's not your principal or sole residence, then that'll be the case. So, just to sort of conclude on this, if you're a resident where your mobile home is your sole residence, this bill does not apply in any way, directly or indirectly. It's only if you have more than one, and it really is aimed at the vacation homes in the primary areas in California. And it's consistent with mobile home or rent control ordinances because every space or apartment rented by someone that can afford 2 homes is a space or apartment not being rented to someone that truly needs rental assistance. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Alex Boggs with Tower Management to answer committee questions, give a practical example of what we're talking about.
Okay.
Good morning, Madam
Good morning.
Chairwoman and members. My name is Alex Boggs. I work for Tower Management Company. We own and manage mobile home parks. I know rent control is a tough subject. I'm not here to discuss it per se. I'm really here to ask for support for Assembly Bill 317 to restrict rent control for second homes. My family owns a mobile home park in Oceanside, California, near the beach. It's a delightful community. And Oceanside has very strict rent control. We've owned the community about 40 years, long before rent control was enacted by the city. This community has about 176 sites, and over half of the sites in our community are second and third homes. And what I mean by that is simply the residents have second or third homes in our community that are not their primary residence. And we know this because we send out the statements, the rent statements, to the residents, and we send them to Oregon, to Nevada, to Utah, to Riverside, Redlands, Palm Springs, all over. We also did extensive title searches on every single person that lives in our community. Our rents at our community are $363 a month. That's about $12 a day. You can't even pitch a tent in a state park in California for $12 a day. I know my parking when I get back to Los Angeles is going to be more than $12. It's a great deal, and people take advantage of the low rents because of rent control. We recently had a new resident move into the park. This resident bought a used manufactured home. It was $108,000. They paid $108,000 cash. It is their third home. Not first, not second, but their third. I know people support rent control because they think it provides affordable housing. Well, in our case, we think it provides low rents for people looking for vacation homes. I think that it's being taken advantage by residents that are affluent and wealthy, although I'm sure most of the residents in our community would say they are not affluent and they are not wealthy. However, I would submit to you that a poor person cannot afford a second home or a third home at the beach, period. And rent control is not, or I don't think was ever intended to help provide vacation homes. We've been trying to get residents to sign long-term leases and have not been very successful. We feel that the mobile home residency law, 798-21, has no teeth. We cannot increase rents on people with second homes because they change their homeowner exemption or they put up for sale signs in their windows. I'm not asking you to do away with rent control, although I would be pleased if it happened. I am asking you to do away with rent control for second homeowners. I don't think they're entitled to it, and I think rent control was designed to preserve affordable housing, not vacation homes.
Thank you for your testimony. You have another witness, Catherine?
Catherine Borg with the Western Manufactured Housing Communities Association. We're the sponsor of AB 317. Over the last decade, we've attempted to do different things in the way of rent control, and we've done different things in the way of trying to fix the abuses of people who have second homes in mobile home parks. The problem has been is that people abuse the current law when it comes to primary residence. All they have to do is have a savvy realtor when they buy the home to switch their exemption from their existing conventional home to the mobile home that's in the mobile home park, and then you are able to get rent control under the current law, because that's what turns on the current law on whether or not you get rent control if your homeowner's exemption is on that home. So tax-wise, it's only about you only get about a $70 savings with that tax checkoff, regardless of whether it's your, $500,000 conventional home in the valley or your, $150,000 home in the park. So that's been an abuse that's been out there. And this bill, our intent is that if your mobile home is not your sole residence, why do you need rent control? And that's what we're trying to fix with this bill. And appreciate all the work that the committee has done. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Next witness.
Trent Smith on behalf of the California Mobile Home Park Owners Alliance. We're also in support of the bill, and I don't think I can add anything more than what you heard from the primary witness. I think that pretty much states the intent of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition? Morning, Brian.
Good morning, members. Brian Augusta on behalf of the Golden State Manufactured Homeowners League and Western Center on Law and Poverty. I, too, want to acknowledge the work of the chair and her staff on trying to make this bill more workable. This bill that didn't get a hearing last year, but the reality is, I think in some ways, it starts from a flawed principle and attempts to kind of fix it have only made it worse. I want to talk about 2 points about this bill that I think should be troubling for the committee. The first is that the bill dramatically changes the purpose and intent of this statute, and it shifts it from one being about that prohibits people from using a rent-controlled mobile home as a vacation home, which we've heard numerous times is the intent, to one that effectively prevents low-income people from owning any other real estate. And that's a big change in the law, and I'll explain that more in a second. The second is, and this has not been talked about much, but the bill also establishes for the first time, to our knowledge, in any California statute, a mandatory arbitration provision, that any dispute over this provision does not go to court, but instead goes to arbitration. That is almost exclusively a matter of private contract. I think that's an issue that needs more examination. But let's talk about what this bill does. I'm sympathetic to the story that the gentleman from Oceanside has talked about, but I want to tell another story. First, let me point out that the law here is changed. We're changing the word primary residence to sole residence. Now, when we wrote the law, it was because we were concerned about vacation homes. We didn't want the mobile home to be a vacation home. So we're saying, is this your primary home, or do you actually have a primary home somewhere else? This bill says it has to be your sole residence. Now, let's look at this from the point of view of a low-income homeowner. Let's call her Betsy. She's worked all her life. She didn't make a lot of money, but she raised her family, and when her kids were out of the house, she worked for a while as a nurse. She worked very hard and doesn't have a lot to show for it, but when her husband died and her children moved out, she wanted to downsize a little bit from her modest home, and she bought a mobile home. And she said, I think a good investment would be, if I'm going to buy a mobile home, something that's located on someone else's land, I think buying in a rent-controlled park might be a safe investment. And so she did that. But then her son says to her, well, don't sell the family home. You know, you've almost paid it off. It's not a big home, but it's going to be worth something, and you need to retire someday, and you need to pay for your medical expenses. That's an investment. Now, if she had sold the home and put that money in the stock market or space travel or anything else, we wouldn't be questioning how she spent that money as an investment. But because what this bill does is say, we do not think that you should hold on to that family home as an investment. That real estate alone is one investment that we're not going to permit you to have. Now, she doesn't have much. She has very little. This is maybe a little bit of more income to help pay for in-home care at some point. Maybe something that she can pass on to her children who are fairly modest. So instead of renting it out, she holds on to the home, and she's living in a park where her primary residence is a rent-controlled mobile home, and she's been owning this other rental property, this very modest home that's spinning off a tiny bit of income for this very modest woman, and now we are changing the rules on her, and we are not grandfathering her in. If you read the bill, this is no longer her we're not asking whether this is her primary residence. It is her primary residence. We're now asking, is it your sole residence? The bill now says you cannot own any other property. You cannot have an interest in any other property. Now, as I said, if she invested her money in the stock market, we wouldn't question her. But if she invested in her own, holding on to her own family home, we are. So that's a very troubling change in the law. We don't grandfather her in. And if this bill passes, the next day the park owner can raise her rent, devalue her home, and probably eventually push her out of the park. Now, so that's one concern. Second concern, even if you don't fit under that story, but you are actually just, this is your only home, and you don't think these new expansive rules that the bill provides, that you think you're being unfairly told that you violated it, what's your recourse? Your only recourse is arbitration. Now, I've learned a lot about arbitration over the past week. It's not a bad system, but I'm wondering if anyone in this committee knows that I didn't. It's entirely unregulated in California. You know, you don't need to be a judge. You don't even need to be a lawyer. You don't need to even have any training. You know, if you have a pulse, you can be an arbitrator. And that probably makes sense because you're not required to follow the law. There are no standards. There are no canons of conduct. There are no ethical standards. It's an entirely private system. It's not subject to public scrutiny. It occurs in private. The outcome of the case does not need to be, the decision does not need to be in writing. And under this bill, you have no further recourse. The decision is final. So we are, and who pays for that? The park owner. And there's a well-established principle in arbitration, this has been demonstrated, that the repeat payer often benefits. Why? It's logical. The arbitrator knows who is buttering their bread. And so in this system, we have the park owner repeatedly paying an arbitrator for what is essentially private administration of justice. There is no recourse to the public courts in this bill. So I think the bill has a lot of problems. I understand the vacation home issue that the gentleman from Oceanside has raised, but we are changing the law. We are saying this has to be your sole residence. That's a huge change, and we're giving people a very limited recourse on that. So for all those reasons, I would ask that this bill be held in committee for further work. Thank you.
Brian, I think that I want to address the issue of the arbitration. We had a conversation in my office yesterday, and Mr. Calderon has agreed to address that issue in the Senate once it gets to the Senate, allowing the homeowner to have a choice. My opinion, I would prefer to keep it as an arbitration because it's no cost to the homeowner. However, if they choose to go to court, they will be able to do so once this bill is amended in the Senate. If that doesn't happen, I'm really going to be upset, and we're going to...
I don't have any problem. I don't have any objection at all. I'd be happy to do that. I thought less litigation benefits folks that don't have money.
Absolutely.
I agree with you.
The issue of casualties of someone owning another home, and now they've moved here or having an interest in another home. I would say Pomona, my home city, has 26 mobile home parks. Those folks are paying anywhere from $600 to $900 in very, very substandard conditions with overflowing septic tanks. If anybody has ever read the book The Jungle, I mean, that would be paradise compared to where some of my constituents live. We have tried to address that over many years. Oceanside, $363. I would love to be able to send, some of these very poor working individuals, and for them to have the opportunity to live in a place like that. My committee has been focused on trying to address the issue of homelessness. We have thousands of people that have absolutely nothing that are living under bridges, in our streets, in very tough neighborhoods. This is one way that we can try to begin to address that and put a roof over some of these people's heads. So I will continue asking for, if there are any other witnesses in opposition, to please come forward at this time.
If I may respond, Madam Chair, just very briefly. Again, I'm willing to open up. I'm willing to open up the dispute to choose between arbitration and the courts. That's not a problem. And arbitrators, there aren't any qualifications, but if you're not qualified, you don't get selected. That's all there is to it. I mean, it's possible for you to get. I mean, I do arbitrations, and I compete for business in arbitrations, and there's just too many qualified arbitrators out there to think that someone will choose someone who walked in the door and said, I'm an arbitrator. But it's a fair process in there. I'm out of 5, each one gets to ding 2, and whoever's left is the arbitrator. So I think that's a very fair process. But the nurse example really hits at the heart of the issue. The issue is who owns the property and whether or not they can get the value of their property. Now, as it related to my earlier versions of the bill, the argument was, well, mobile home owners can build equity. And the reason they can build equity is because the rents are artificially low, and since the rents will be artificially low for years to come, you can sell your mobile home for more. So we can argue and debate about whether that's fair, but here we're talking about investments here. We're talking about someone downsizing, going to a mobile home, maybe leasing out, because it's a good, sound business investment. But who should get the benefit of the property? The owner of the property or the mobile home park renter? And we think, as it relates to vacation homes, it should be, we shouldn't take that value away from the property owner.
Okay. Are there any other witnesses in opposition? No. Okay. Those were your closing comments. Any questions? Welcome, Mr. Weissel.
Thank you. And I appreciate getting to the issue of arbitration. I think a mandatory arbitration is not something that we necessarily need to be doing. Maybe selective is giving the parties a choice is something that I support. I know we've gone through this bill quite extensively. We've done a lot of work on this bill, and I think the intent is very noble in attempting to create new affordability opportunities. I support that as well. How we get to, I think, the intent of rent controls, opening up affordability in this type of housing. Mobile home parks are a very affordable option, and a lot of people that I know in my district that own a mobile home do it because they feel like they own something. They own a structure, and it has value, and that's an investment for them. And if they can get a fixed price, they can make long-term solutions that'll lead to a stable lifestyle, which is something that I support as well. So, we have looked at all the potential scenarios that could arise as a result of looking at this problem on the basis of ownership of an asset, because that doesn't necessarily imply that somebody has means. If I'm an elderly person and I have a lifestyle that requires me to maybe live in 2 places or live there but own a separate income property that I probably inherited, all of a sudden I'm facing litigation that I'm going to be paying for that I can't afford, and we identified several scenarios where I have, let's say, a brother that I'm trying to help, and he has no means of financing the ownership of a home, so I help him do that. All of a sudden, he's gonna be penalized. It can be a brother, it can be a cousin, it can be somebody that I decide by the goodness of my heart that I want to help, and doing so, allowing him to use my credit or use my name to qualify to, you know, if I'm a co-signer on a loan or whatever I choose to do, all of a sudden, you know, it opens up a scenario where I'm facing litigation. We looked at a few of those scenarios, and I think this is an imperfect process to try to address an imperfect law. I think rent control in and of itself has significant problems that we need to address, but I think this approach doesn't necessarily, it gets at a few bad apples by hurting a lot of innocent people, and I'm just concerned about that right now. And I want to see if we can find a way, working with the chair, to work on this bill a little bit more, maybe keep it alive today.
If you look at the analysis, section 2A,
It's your sole residence. You can own a vacation home somewhere else.
I mean, that's the intent.
Sole residence. If it's your sole residence, you know, as determined ultimately by an arbitrator or a court, whichever way, then that's your sole residence. You are not exempt from rent control. So you can actually be this nurse, have that as a sole residence, and keep your other property, if that's your sole residence. But if you're, you know, if you're living in Canada,
I know.
and during the cold weather you want to come down and live in Oceanside or Malibu, then that's not your sole residence.
I understand that, but if I'm performing military service, the burden is on me to prove that I am. If I get sick and I'm in a hospital for an extended time, the burden is on me to prove that I am. And the expense is shifted, where all of a sudden my rent goes up simply because of a condition that was beyond my control, not because I don't live there. And
Mr. Hoy, so our intent with this bill is not to do any of that. Our intent is that if you are the owner and that you live in that home, that's your home, and our intent is not to raise your rent on rent control.
And I support that. I support that.
And we're committed to work on those side issues, to tie them up further. You know, we believe that there's language in there that talks about, you know, you can take a vacation, you have military leave, you have, you know, all these other things that are legitimate reasons for you to be away from your home for, you know, extended periods of time. But if you don't feel that goes further enough, we'll work with your staff, we'll work with you, you know, as long as we can keep this bill moving forward. We know that we have a big hurdle when we get to the Senate, because this will go to Senate Judiciary Committee, and I'm sure that they'll have a lot of things for us that we haven't even thought of yet. But we just need to move this issue along, and the premise being that if this is not your residence that you live in all the time, that you shouldn't have rent control.
We have deadlines for 2-year bills.
I understand. We're going to continue to move forward. 7-Member Atkins.
Thank you, Chairwoman. You know, I want to start by thanking Mr. Calderon and the sponsors for working on this last year as we thought this bill was coming forward. I looked at it and I thought, wow, there are some issues here, and in particular to get to some of the issues that Mr. Hueso talked about, which I think a number of those comments are addressed in the changes, recommended amendments that the staff and the chairwoman worked on. I do not want to see the burden of proof be on people who are going to visit their son for 3 months even. I mean, people need to have, individuals need to have the ability to do things in their lives that are just not, we shouldn't control that to the degree. And I think the legislation takes care of that and met a number of the issues and concerns that I had last year. I mean, we are suggesting to change law, but I think it is a way in which is a fair balance. I understood before I joined this committee or asked to be on this committee and looked at previous year reports that mobile home issues are like the big issue that come forward again and again and again, and as it relates to rent control. And I certainly support keeping rent control in mobile home parks because I think it meets a need of helping people who have low incomes have affordable and quality places to live. I think that those are correct policy issues for us to always keep in the forefronts and try to figure out a way to balance the property rights of owners of mobile home parks, but also have the ability to have affordable housing available to people. And if the argument that resonates with me is if it's this open that people can own multiple properties and take advantage of rent control, I, like the chairwoman, have concerns about people who would ordinarily otherwise have access to those units. I understand your concerns, Mr. Augusta. Any chipping away of anything that could impact people, I certainly believe you should advocate so that we're not taking rights away from poor people. That's important. I think this strikes the right balance, and I'll be interested to see what changes occur as it goes over to the Senate side. I feel comfortable with the things that you have included here, that the committee staff and the chairwoman have worked on, and I will tell you, most of the calls, and we got a number of calls on this bill, and I was monitoring it because I wanted to hear what the comments were from people, and we asked one question of everyone that called from, regardless of where they called from: do you own more than one proper housing unit? Do you own a mobile home? And do you own, where else do you own? Not one person who called us. So I have a feeling they're concerned about the same issues you mentioned about rights, but their rationale was all over the place, from I don't want more low-income people living next to me. One person did tell me that, Mr. Augusta, so we might ought to work on the messaging. We might work on the talking points. But the others were, this doesn't apply to me. I'm just concerned that you're doing something that could impact me, and taking that into consideration, I think this strikes a good balance, and I'll look forward to see what other changes come forward, because I do think we want to get at the best balance that protects the rights and keeps in place this affordable housing opportunity for people.
Moving forward, before I go back to Mr. Way, so I just want to make sure that I have your commitment that you will continue to work on clarification of Section 2A as it was brought forward in Section 6 of our committee analysis. Mr. Waisel?
No, I just want to make clear that under the possible implications of this bill, just because you own property somewhere else doesn't necessarily invite the exemption to be lifted, right?
Yes. The intent is that you live in your mobile home most of the year, and that's your primary residence.
You can own other property somewhere else.
You can have ownership in other properties. We just don't want you to own 3 homes that you flip from, winter to summer to spring to, fall, and, go to Boston for the fall to go look at the leaves and go to Florida in the summer.
But Mr. Waisel, the bill does not provide that right now. I mean, Section 1 says, first, that it's the sole residence, and we've deleted the word primary. We've said sole. So what does that change mean when the court looks at that? Why did they change it from primary to sole?
We're committed to work on it.
That's a different statement. But
again, the issue of rent control goes back to having affordable housing for the poorest of the poor residents of the state of California. I want to make sure that as we continue to move forward, that is the primary focus. And Mr. Augusta, I'm going to stress that we can't continue to make changes to this without your input, and we really need you at the table.
And I would say, Madam Chair, except for those changes we talked about here, I would rather not make any changes. If this is a bill that the committee's comfortable with, I don't want to change it. And but I don't know what I'm headed into in the Senate. So if we could continue to rely on your wise counsel and the good work of your staff, I think we can minimize any changes and certainly deal with the ones that are made.
Clarification on the issues that have been brought out. Mr. Miller. Mm-hmm. Sure. The bill has been moved. Is there a second? Bill has been moved in second. Madam Secretary.
The motions do pass. Torres?
Aye.
Torres, aye. Atkins? Atkins, aye. Bradford? Cedillo? No. Cedillo, no. Hueso?
I'm an abstain right now.
Jeffries? Jeffries, aye. Miller? Miller, aye. The vote is 4-1.
Thank you, Madam
The
Chair.
bill's out. And
Thank you, members.
good luck, and we'll be watching.
I welcome the transparency.
Okay, item number 3 has already been presented. Is there a motion do pass? Okay. Yes, Senate Bill 880. There's a motion. We need a second on second. Okay. Madam Secretary?
The motions do pass to Judiciary. Torres?
Aye.
Torres, aye. Atkins? Atkins, aye. Bradford? Cedillo? Cedillo, aye. Waso? Waso, aye. Jeffries? Jeffries, aye. Miller? Miller, aye. Vote is 6-0.
6-0 is the vote. The bill is out. For those members that were absent, item number 2 was pulled. And that is the final item on our agenda. Thank you all for coming. We're adjourned.